Hello! In today's video, I'm going to show you how I make a paper feather. It's a two-part video, so the first part of the video is just a generic making paper feathers from various papers that you might have around the house. The second part of the video, which I'll show at a later date, is how to make a blue jay's feather. So this will look really realistic. So it takes something abstract and fun, maybe even whimsical, depending on the paper you use, and creates something that's really a little more realistic and really something you'd find in nature. Now, my process is based on a tutorial that you can find at ultimatepapermache.com, and the author of that video channel gives excellent tutorials on various paper mache objects. Now, I don't make all of them, but I loved her tutorial on making paper mache feathers. So this is my take on that and how I find it valuable in my creating and my paper arts. So to create my feathers, I use a procedure that's based on the one on ultimatepapermache.com, and I'll include the link below. Basically what I do is I select my papers, and that's how I start the project, and that helps give me the size that I want to create unless I'm making a specific one. And because I want to make a blue jay feather, I'm making a few variations to start with. I have some extremely thin kraft paper, and as you can see it folds and it's very, very thin. And I wanted to show you this just to show you the variations using the glue. I have some cardstock in this gray color, which we'll use. I have white copy paper, which is my favorite to use because it makes a nice thin feather, and it's a little thicker than this kraft paper here. And then I have just some scrapbooking paper because I think it makes a beautiful paper feather, a little different than the realistic one we're going to really focus on today. But I wanted to show you the procedure with all of them. So basically I find the paper or the scraps of paper that I'm going to use, and I want to make sure I have two very close to the same size pieces. And this is for either side of the feather. So it's the same procedure for all of them. So I'll just cut all those pieces just so that I have two of each. So here I have my pairs of paper. From there I want to get started, so I'll need some masking tape. Now masking tape comes in various widths. If you want a larger feather, use the larger width. This is a standard roll of masking tape, and this is fine for today's project. The other thing I'll need is just some wire. And so this is different gauge wire. This is a little thicker. I don't know the exact number, but it's a little thicker than this one. They both work really well. If I was making a larger or a thicker feather, I'd use the heavier wire, but I'd also just use what I have on hand. So I'm going to take this thin wire and I'm going to cut it to the length that I want my feather to be, maybe a little bit shorter. So I'll just cut some lengths of wire and then I straighten them out. So now I have all my papers with the wires in front of them. I could play with the wire more to straighten it out if I want, or I can keep that arc like a natural feather. But either way, I just get the wire to the setting that I want. Now from there, I need to cover that wire with masking tape just so it doesn't rust. So I'm going to move these off and I'll show you how I do it. It's the same procedure for all the feathers. Now I find I use my silicone mat because it's just helpful because working with the masking tape is pretty sticky. You want to choose a masking tape that coincides with the size of your feather. So if I had a very thick and large feather, I'd use a larger roll of masking tape. But this is a standard masking tape and it works really well. I just take my tape, find the wire, and I usually like to start with the wire that's straighter. I leave about 1.5 inches to 2 inches at the bottom, and I try and keep 1 inch or so to the top as well. And then I just press it down on my mat and cut the top off. Now I need to find another piece of masking tape approximately the same size to go underneath it. So I'll take my tape, I'll pull off my tape with my feather, and this is the part that I want to make sure the tape doesn't really wrinkle. If it wrinkles a little bit, it's not the greatest, but I can make it work. Now I want to get my wire encased in the tape without the tape sticking to itself, and this can be a little challenging. I like to start at one side with a little bit of overhang because I can always cut that off, and that gives me a good basis to start this. And this is about the trickiest part of this procedure of making this feather. So I just hold it a little taut and I pull the tape up. Now, as you can see, it's not perfect, but to me that's better than if it wrinkles, if I have to refold that tape. So from here, I just press it down, make sure it's a nice adherence around that wire. I'll do it on the other side as well. And now I can attach it to my paper. I want to make sure all of that tape is covered with whatever paper I'm using. Now here's the interesting part. The thicker the paper, the more leeway you have with the glue. The thinner the paper, the more readily the paper will buckle. So you don't want to use a lot of glue at any point, but you have a little more leeway with the thicker paper. So what I like to do is I like to take my glue and I just run a bead, not too much, just a bead down the center. Then I take my brush and I brush it very thin across the length of that paper. If I need a little more glue, I'll take just a little more glue, but I want to go sparingly rather than too much glue. So I'm covering the entire paper here with this glue. Then I take my tape covered wire and I set it down. Again, I'm trying to make sure that it goes flat. The tape comes out flat on the paper. I press it down to get a good adherence. Then I quickly take a little bit of glue, run it down the length of the tape. I'm using the least glue possible here. Don't want it to bead up anywhere. And then I'll take my paper and sandwich it in. Now at this point, I'll take my brush, because it has glue on it, and just leave it in a jug of water so my brush doesn't get all ruined by the glue. But at this point, I'm going to be very careful and burnish with my finger that paper. I'm trying to get that wire to really show through. And I'm trying to get a nice even seal between both sides of the paper. And you'll want to do this on both sides, the front and the back, and really burnish that paper. I like to use my nail, but be careful because you can easily puncture the paper because it is wet from the glue. And really get that nice wire showing up. Now from here, I'm going to let this dry, and I like to let it dry on its side. That way air can go through both of them. And it takes only a few hours. You can leave it overnight as well. Again, I like to just make sure all the edges are nicely sealed. And then I just let that dry so it'll be ready to use for our shaping. Now if I'm using this really thin paper, and this is the point I wanted to make, you want to use the least amount of glue and moisture as possible. So if I'm going to take that brush from that jug of water, I need to make sure it's completely dry. So let me show you what I mean. So I've taken my brush from my water jug and completely dried it. So you can see it's completely dry here. Because I want to use the least amount of glue possible, I'm not going to put it right down on my paper. I'm going to make a little puddle over here. And then from here, I can really play with the glue on my brush. I'm going to use the inside of the paper just because of the way it rolls. And again, brushing the slightest amount of glue. Now I can see the paper is starting to buckle already. I'll put down my wire, take a little more glue on my brush, and again, trying to use it very sparingly. I want just enough glue to adhere the papers to each other securely, but no more. So again, I have my glue down. I'll take my paper and gently press it down. Now because this paper is wet, it's in its most delicate stage, and because it's thin, it's already very delicate. So at this point, I just want to burnish it just with my fingers. you could start to see a little bit of the tape showing through. Again, you can see the paper's buckling a little bit. We'll be doing some trimming later, but I just want to take a look and see if I missed any spots with glue. And if I did, I'll just go in there again very lightly with the glue and adhere it down. So we'll let these feathers dry, then we'll come back and work on the shaping. So now the paper for the paper feathers have dried, and I wanted to show you some of the differences here. So here's with the thinnest paper that I use, and that's that very thin brown kraft paper. As you can see, it started to buckle a little bit in places, so it didn't come out perfectly. You can also see the edge here of the masking tape. That's not a problem for me because when I cut the feather, that will change. But I wanted to show you some examples of where I used watered down glue, and you see there's a lot of buckling here. I cut it to a feather shape, and I think I can still use this on my Thanksgiving table, but it buckled quite a bit. It's a different effect. It's not one that I particularly care for, but it's usable. And especially if I was to paint over it, I would hide a lot of these sins. With the heavy cardstock, I got a beautiful result. It's very smooth, and then when I cut it, I'll have just a beautiful, thin, feather-like result. Same thing here with my scrapbooking paper. It's so smooth. With the white copy paper, I got a little bit of buckling. Again, it's a thinner paper, so I'll get more buckling, but it's also going to produce a more delicate result. Now on these two, the difference is the tape and the wire, the positioning. So this went up the length of this piece, and this stopped here. So as you can see, there's less strength to the area without the tape and the wire. They can still be used, but keep in mind for different projects, it won't be used in the same way. So now I just want to start cutting out my feathers. You can look online for templates, but it's really just an oval, and then you want to cut some shapes down to it. So I'll start with my thinnest piece here. I'm just going to cut, and I like to just vary the cut so it's not perfectly straight. And I go all the way around with that oval top. Again, I make large pieces, and I'm starting to get the result of a feather. And I can trim it further down, bringing my feather to a close right that way. And then I'll just trim around the pieces. Now once I'm happy with the overall result, the overall size, I can start to go in there and create a few little notches or some little individual feathers. I just go in there, and you can see where it's starting to come along. I can make a nice deep notch, or even just little shallow notches. And it creates a very interesting result. I can stop there, or I can continue as much as I want. I like to get rid of that point right at the end and just blend that out somewhat. And then maybe make a little notch up here and one on this side. Remove those notches, and then I have the beginnings of a feather. I'll continue doing this with the remaining pieces that I have here and show you those results. So here I have all the feathers cut down to size. I'm going to leave my colored paper feather just as it is because I really like to really emphasize that beautiful pattern on the paper. I have the cardstock one cut out to look like feathers, and I can enhance this further with paint or just leave it as is. I have my brown paper feather, and then I have my white ones. And in the next video, I'll show you how I paint this to look like a blue jay feather. You can really go to town painting it to whatever feather you want. Just look up and do some research on the particular bird feather you want to recreate with your paper mache. I wanted to show you some quick other ones that I used from paper and how So now depending on the paper and the pattern, this is how I'll keep them, and then I can enhance them as I need them for my props. This one I'm going to make into a quill because it has the text, that writing on the feather itself, and I think that's so beautiful. So I just cut it down to a feather shape here, and I'll notch it and embellish it further as needed. The same thing with this particular pattern. I just love the way that looks with those broken lines. Here I have some interesting handmade paper that's printed with these beautiful colors, and I don't know if the camera picks it up, but that's pretty in gold. And here I have a blue one and a purple one. And these are not complete. I'll just enhance them as I want. So that's how I make paper feathers. They're really beautiful, and depending on the paper you use, you get a totally different effect. It can be bare, it can be elegant, or it can be really whimsical and colorful, depending on the papers you choose and how you want to embellish it further. In the next video, I'll show you how I paint it to look like a blue jay's feather. I just love creating feathers based on realistic designs from real birds and making them look authentic. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. And don't forget to click on that bell so that you get notified of future videos in my series. Thanks for joining me today.